秦柳，咱们把声音稍微放小一点，我最后检查一下 Trevor 的这个声音和视频。Trevor would like to have a final check on your sound and video before we start in 2 minutes.
Hello, how does that sound? Can you see me?
Yes, really good.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. 好，秦柳，我们可以把声音放回来了。Amy, hello, I can see you now. Final sound check with you, Amy.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's good.
Loud and clear.
Okay, I can share my screen then.
We're gonna start in 1 minute. Just hold on for a moment. 好，秦柳，那我们把那个音乐放回来吧。Amy, you can share your screen now.
Thanks. Hopefully this works. Okay, I hope everyone can see that.
Yes, I can see it.
All right. Okay, we'll start then. Good morning to everyone joining us in China, and good evening to those who are joining us in Canada. We want to thank you all for attending our Meat and Seafood virtual webinar on import policy and regulation. So we have a pretty busy agenda. We'll have opening remarks, which is what I'm doing right now, a Beijing market access update, and then we'll move into our keynote speeches from OIG, and then we'll have time for a question and answer at the end. I do encourage you to write your questions in the comment box as the presentation goes on. These will be questions that are directed towards our presentators from OIG. So with that, a big thank you to our speakers. So Yang Binbin, the director of OIG Research Institute and GM of the Overseas Division, and Feng Guan, deputy director of OIG Research Institute. Before we get started, I just wanted to say, please feel free to contact us at any time for market development, information or assistance. So if you are in help of finding agriculture and agri-food suppliers in Canada, please contact myself, Amy Antonini, or my colleague, Yu Zhang. We're always looking forward to hearing from you. And for market access inquiries, please contact the AFC CFA Market Access Secretariat, which we have their email there, or Trevor Yu. I don't have his email on there, but we can share that after. So our hope today is that we can answer some of the uncertainty and questions surrounding China's meat and seafood import policy and regulation. Before we get to this session, I'm going to call on my colleague Trevor Yu to provide a market access update from Beijing.
Thank you, Amy. And hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. 大家好. Firstly, thank you to OIG, the organizers, and all participants for attending today. I'm the Agriculture Counselor from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada at the Canadian Embassy in Beijing, and I'm responsible for agriculture market access issues including the meat sector, fish and seafood sector, among others. As you know, there exist ongoing challenges and new ones that arise on a regular basis with respect to maintaining Canada's market access and solving issues as they arise. It's worth highlighting that Canada continues to face many difficulties in engaging with Chinese customs authorities, despite many, many instances of outreach. Please rest assured, however, that we continue to make all efforts to support your trade. We want you to be successful, but we will continue to face challenges. The upcoming task of modifying and renewing CIFRA profiles is top of mind for us, but most immediately pressing for Canadian fish and seafood establishments. As of today, none of the Canadian fish and seafood establishments that have submitted applications to have the registrations in CIFRA renewed have received any approvals by Customs China. It has been extremely challenging to get meaningful commitment from Chinese Customs to correct the problems in CIFRA to allow establishments to proceed with necessary updates. As I mentioned, we have been seeking to make contact with Customs on a regular basis, and staff at the embassy and others in the Canadian government, some of whom are attending today, have been working directly with industry. We have requested Customs commitment that trade continue, not be interrupted, but we have not received a concrete response. As other sectors will also need to jump these hurdles in the coming months, we remind industry stakeholders that doing business with China is high risk, especially in light of the registry expiry date and continued uncertainty around Customs China's approval process and timelines. And more broadly, Canadian exporters in various sectors are facing increasing challenges, and businesses need to put in place risk mitigation measures as this continues to be a very challenging market. We hope you'll find the webinar helpful today, and hopefully information provided will help you better understand the dynamics of the Chinese market. Thank you. Merci. 谢谢.
Thank you, Trevor. We will now turn to Mr. Feng Guan, Deputy Director of OIG, to speak to regulations of the GAC Decree 248 and 249. And again, please note there'll be time for Q&A at the end of our session. But if you have any questions, you can click the Q&A button to type your questions into the chat box, and the speakers will look to address them during the Q&A session.
好的，感谢加拿大使馆的各位同仁。
Thank you very much, the Canadian Embassy, and also thank you to all the participants for joining us online. And I'm going to give you an interpretation of the new regulation. I am from OIG. My name is Feng Guan. So I will give you the interpretation of the new regulation on Decree 248 and 249. And for the meat products imported to China, and later in the next session, the director Yang Bingbing would also give you a talk on aquatic products, and I would also like to answer some questions. So first of all, I'll give you a quick introduction of the new decrees that's just recently being published. Actually, for meat products and aquatic products, the registration requirement for imports into China has always been there. Before, we had an inspection and quarantine system, which was with the AQ and SAQ. So for meat products and dairy products and bird nests, these are the basic categories that require registration. And this time, in 2022, in January 1st this year, actually at GAC, they have published this new decree, which is a regulation on the registration administration of overseas enterprise producing imported food, which was based on the original foundation, expands to all categories of foods, and which basically inherits the original requirements with certain updates. So for meat and aquatic products, and the registration actually has changed to a certain degree. And so that to better give you the information or to prepare for the exporters to understand these requirements. This is what I am going to cover in my talks today. And besides, there is also Decree 249, which is on the right, Measure for the Administration of Import and Export Food Safety. And this has also been around for a long time with certain updates. And in DQ SAQ, we also had a similar measure, and also there are the requirements for basically for meat and aquatic products. But now all the requirements have been consolidated into this new decree. So for the importers, they would have to satisfy this requirements. And today, I am going to have these three parts for my talk. So first of all, for the key interpretation of Order 248, and then I will talk about the regulations of Order 249, and then in the next part of my talk, I will talk about meat enterprises. So for the Aussie meat enterprises that export to China, I will talk about the key concerns. So first of all, we'll take a look at Decree or Order 248. So Order 248 has actually been implemented for about 1 year. And actually, it was published in April in 2021, which actually garnered a lot of attention and a response from the international society. Actually, these two orders, I'm sure you already gained a good understanding. And I know yesterday, Canada also offered a training for the meat enterprises. And so I would not go into the specifics of each articles, but I will focus on some of the issues that you pay attention to. First of all, for the difference between the registration number in China and record number of imported food exporters. So actually, basically, there are for the food importers and exporters, they need to register with GAC. So for those who export to China and those who import, actually, for the manufacturers overseas, say for example, Canadian meat company, if you want to export to China, you need to register with the GAC. You need to get a registration number so that you can start exporting to China. That's for the manufacturer, requirement for the manufacturer. And then, if you want to export your product to China, of course, then it is constitute international trade. So for China's side, there is a importer in China. So that importer resides in China. And understand that there are also Chinese importers that are in this seminar, in this webinar. And so we have exporters and importers. So they are the two parties of the international trade. So both of them needs to be registered with the GAC. So this is actually quite easy for the importer-exporters. They just need to fill in the registration information, and they can log into this website to submit their application. And so if a meat manufacturer is also an exporter, and they have these two identities, so they are, first of all, the manufacturers, they need to be registered, and they're also an exporter that export to China, so they both needs to be registered. So, or they can also do this via an agency, which is an exporting company. And then the conditions of registration for overseas manufacturers. For most of the enterprises here, I think most of you already have registered with a GAC, because many of you have been exporting to China over a decade or for even longer than that. And so basically, the export, well, if we look at number one, so the food safety management system of the country where the manufacturer is located have passed the equivalence assessment and review by the GAC. Since there's always been trade ongoing between the two countries, so I think number one, there's no problem. So in Decree 249, and there is a requirement for retrospective examination. So GAC may require a retrospective inspection. And however, Canada is the leader in food safety international, so I think there's no problem. Actually, between China and Canada, I think with regard to meat products, among other food products, there's always been a long-term cooperation. And number two is a requirement for enterprises. So you need to get approval and also establish approval by the competent authority in Canada. So this is actually responsibility of the Canadian competent authority. So when you want to export to China, the competent authority in China would perform that supervisory role. And so this is also in the spirit of the legislation. So the competent authority in Canada actually performs that supervisory role. So I guess there's no problem for that.
So with the approval, they were established and under really effective supervision. And number three, it's very important to enterprises. And this is something we will face this time as a big challenge, because this is a new registration system. We know that GAC continues the registration of the meat enterprises registered in China, because the list and the registrant products have been provided to GAC. So there's a transition on the first day of 2022. However, in this system, in order to comply with Decree 248, there's insufficient information and material. So in light of this opportunity of this review and examination, GAC will continue to screen and review those registered enterprises. Those comply with the requirements will be able to preserve the registration candidacy. Once it doesn't comply, it will be eliminated. So this is a very important part of the management system, to comply with the requirements of GAC in order to establish an effective food safety mechanism as well as protection system. The two systems, number one is a food safety management system, which is very direct and simple, straightforward, because a lot of Canadian enterprises have acquired third-party compliance and certificate. We have received and see those international certificates from the international organizations. So on this point, I think most of the enterprises from Canada would have no problem. But on this basis, we also need to establish a food prevention and protection system. On this, I'd like to take an example from the US. For example, adulteration. Some of those things are adulterated in the food, so the food safety might be damaged. So this is EMA, which is economic benefit motivated factors. So this will be related to fraud of food safety. So this is something we need to pay attention to when we establish a food management system. So in order to comply with the requirements in legal production as well as food safety, in order to make sure there's effective registration and smooth registration, we need to comply with these requirements. Another point might not be really clear to a lot of people, that is to comply with Chinese food safety law. To those exported to China, it has to comply with China's laws and regulations on food safety. China has a established food safety national mechanism, for example, in terms of beef and pork, as well as other meat. We also have corresponding food safety national standards. So this would have to comply with national standards in order to understand the universal standards as well as local standards. For example, the level of contaminants and remnants, as well as those contaminants, that these information would have to be complied with, because at the port of entry, the customs will also check and the sampling test. If this doesn't comply with the test results, then it might be returned or destroyed at the point of entry. And number 4 is inspection and quarantine requirements, because between China and Canada, there is agreement regarding a certain category of meat product. For example, the requirement of diseases, contaminants, as well as packaging. So these are the requirements that have to comply with. So that is why I use the whole page to introduce to you those requirements regarding registration. And regarding 248, I think the registration are divided into 2 categories. Number 1 is recommended by the authorities. Number 2, a registration by the enterprises themselves, including meat as well as other products, are listed under the category recommended by the authorities. For example, I'm a new meat enterprise. To initiate application, you cannot initiate the application yourself because it has to be recommended by an authority in Canada. So in this, regarding the source of the raw materials, the processing technologies, as well as historical data, some of those products with higher risk are actually under this first category, and we have a list of products that need recommendation of country. So in Decree 248, there are 18 categories. However, here in this presentation, there are 19 categories. I would like to offer an explanation here. You see the frozen fruit here. This is actually just added this year in July or August. For example, some of those meat products as well as casings. I see some questions raised by casings companies. And also we see those stuffed pastry products, because this is a very special product between China and Canada. Only China and Canada signed an agreement regarding stuffed pastry products. As far as I remember, in terms of China exporting Chinese dumplings, wontons, stuffed pastries to Canada, and also in return, Canada can export to China in terms of pizza and pies, those Western stuffed pastry products. So in light of this opportunity, China and Canada signed an agreement regarding stuffed pastry product, which is under this first category. Next slide. I would like to talk about these recommended applications, what's the process and what are some of the material that should be submitted to the authorities? These are the 5 categories of materials that will be eventually submitted to GAC. Part of them are supplied by companies and part of them are supplied by the Canadian authorities. Number 1 is letter of recommendation. As a local authority, if you think that this company complies with Chinese registration requirements, then you have the obligation to make the recommendation. It doesn't have a specific format requirement. Number 2, enterprise list and application form. So in terms of the recommendation for the local authorities, it doesn't stay with one company or multiple companies within a specific sector or industry. So you form a list which is categorized based on different products or different industries with key information of the businesses. And also the application forms of the enterprises, which are provided by the businesses to the local authorities and which will be integrated in the final bundle. And on the system, the application will be listed and the information will be consistent with the application information. And number 3, which is the identification documents of the enterprises, such as businesses licenses. There might be different ways of saying in different countries. In China, it might be food production license, a kind of license that's compliant or recognized in both China and Canada. You cannot use a third-party certificate to use as a license of operation. So this is not allowed. And number 4, which is the declaration, which is also has a template in the GAC website. You can fill in corresponding business information and authority information. Number 5, which is the most critical of all, is the examination report. As far as we understand, in the past 12 months, because a lot of companies, a lot of local authorities have made recommendation to GAC, a lot of friends have asked relevant questions because this examination report should be conducted by the local authority. And for businesses, for GAC, it will provide a examination list or list of examination focal points. So on this basis, the local authority would have to provide a description of the examination as well as the results. It has to be more specific than a list of the important points of examination. And these examination report with comprehensive information will be submitted to GAC. And also in Decree 248, when necessary, protection system document, prevention document, as well as outlaying plans, and also process illustration of the plans of the facilities and the cold storage facilities. This is kind of vague in the decree itself. But I would suggest that all the meat companies, when submitting application to provide as much information as possible, that will to the largest extent facilitate the examination of GAC. Because sometimes you think some of the blank space might have asterisks and some doesn't have asterisks, but I think according to my experience, I would suggest businesses to fill in all relevant information as much as possible. In this presentation, you can see that this registration application listed on this slide with the new categories, with the name of the company, with the location of the facilities, legal representative, contact liaison information, etc. All of this information should be consistent with that on the license of operation, as well as other information related to the company. Once the license has been approved, and if information is inconsistent, that might create more difficulties and obstacles. So here I would like to give out a reminder. In order to specify the application and standardize the process, the information should be explicit and clear on this form. Businesses should comply with the requirements of the form to fill in a complete information on this application form. So you see a list of businesses here. I would like to give you an example. You see the registration number, which is registered in Canada, the name of the business, location of registration, the state or province and district, as well as the city and the category of production. It includes SH, CP, PP, CS, DS. This is the production type. And also the registered products as well as HS codes. And this is quite critical after the Decree 248 has been issued, because the registration system, you need to fill in the registered products and the codes, and should be consistent with that submitted in the port of entry. If it's not consistent, then that will create difficulties in the customs declaration. On this slide, I'll focus on examination report. This is provided by customs. I would suggest that meat companies will actually fill in the information one by one according to the requirements of the application form. And you also need to fill in the descriptive information. And if you can provide attached documents as annex, that will be very important to the customs. So if you were in the customs shoes, see the examiners will also check the important point on the checklist to understand the raw materials, packaging, as well as other items on the list.
So you have to fill complete information, which is critical. And so this form can actually be downloaded on the website of the GAC. So I'm sure that Canadian Embassy can also, they also know where to access these documents. So this is the declaration, which is also a template that you can find. So for the registration of the manufacturers, you can do this online. You could just register on the system of the GAC. So for meat products, you can, for either first time, for update of information, extension, rectification, for example, some manufacturers or some registered users, they are suspended. They might need to go through some recommendation. So for first-time registration, the competent authority would assign a registration account to the manufacturer. There's also some updates, some changes. The enterprises, they can actually apply for a registration number on the GAC website. And there is a button called official license or official certification. So if you click on that, it can actually submit your document or register your application to your local competent authority. So when that is processed by the Canadian competent authority, you can actually register for all different categories food. And after you get that account, you can actually just file that application, and then you can get the recommendation from your local competent authority, and then it'll be submitted to the GAC, and then you'll get approval. Then you will get a registration number in China. So there's a question. So if you have multiple license production certificate document, so do you need one registration number or multiple registration number? Say, for example, if a manufacturer, they produce beef and also pork products. So actually for the GAC, for each category of product, you'll be given a different registration number. And then the next question, in the process of the production, say for example, there is a step of slaughtering and segmentation, processing, and storage. Do you need to register each of these steps? Actually, for meat industry, yes. You need to get all these different companies that are responsible for different steps to get registered. Next, I will talk about some of the status in the system. And also this is something that the Canadian enterprises would pay attention to. I think, well, these status is actually very straightforward. But actually, sometimes when you enter the information, and you may answer these different columns, maybe different fields differently. However, this is some of the status that you may see. For example, when you have not completed the information entry, you can actually save the information temporarily, and then it says also status says submitted to the competent authority, waiting for review. And then next is submitted to GAC. So the local competent authority would recommend the enterprise to GAC. And so the application is then given to the GAC. And then recommendation rejected. Of course, nobody likes to see this status. So GAC rejects the recommendation, or the local competent authority does not approve this application. And then next is successfully sent to GAC, which shows that the information is sent successfully to GAC. And then the next status, entered custom database successfully or failed to enter the GAC database. So either you're recommended or you register yourself. Basically, GAC would enter these information into the database so that they can move on to the next step of approval. And if it fails, then you probably need to repeat the process. So once it's waiting to be approved, so here are a few different status. And so first of all, it's accepted, it's entered into the approval stage. And so they will have experts that review the information. Or if it's rejected, that means you probably have incomplete materials, or there are errors. For example, if you want to apply for red wine, however, you enter cookies, of course, then it will be rejected because the information is not correct. And then the experts would actually give comments and feedbacks. So very often, you might see that they would ask for information supplementation and correction. So basically, you will need to submit more information or to offer correct information. And then a status may show that it's not approved, saying it's unapproved or approved. Yeah, if it's approved, then you will be able to, you will get a registration number, or you can extend your registration. And then there is also a status of revoked that usually when there is a critical food safety issue, will you see revoked and then suspended. Suspended is also a status that you can also see. That means there are things that you need to work on, you need to rectify, and they will usually give you a deadline to rectify. And so during that period, you are not able to export products to China. And for those who can meet the deadline, and they need to submit a rectification report, which is a written report that needs to be confirmed by the GAC so that their registration qualification can be reinstalled. And then this is a reminder for the importers in China. So there are some responsibilities for the importers. So the importers, they need to also create a documentation system for importation and sales. And it needs to be a comprehensive documentation. And then they also need to establish an examination verification system for overseas exporters or manufacturers. So this is also very critical and will audit the importers to see whether they have fulfilled their duty. So for example, they will need to have food safety risk control measures and to ensure that they meet the regulations in China. So I think I will take a 1-minute break now before I move on to part 2.
Just want everyone to know that we are trying to get to all your questions in the question and answer box. Some of them will be for the speakers, so perhaps I'll answer them afterwards. And thank you to Mr. Feng Guan.
Okay, I'm back. Now I will talk about Decree 249, which is regarding food safety of the imported food. So basically, it's a requirement for the imported food, and registration is part of the requirement, and of course also the most critical. In this decree for imported food, including meat, there is a review, a verification to make sure that it meets the quality, so which requires the assessment of the exporters, and which also include the the examination or reviews of the overseas producers, exporters, or agents. And then they will also need to be entered into the database. So for the product I entered, the meat factory, we need to have a quality assurance, and also you also need to get a license for importation, and then you would also have to submit the documentation to make sure that it actually meets the requirement. Actually, we will need to see there is the certification. So at the port of entry, for imported meat, and we also need to check the documentation for the declaration, and also for these we'll also check on certain batches. And there are also questions about the percentage of batches that's being checked. Right now, actually, this is not so frequent, especially recently for the cold chain COVID PCR test, and also sanitization or sterilization. And the randomized check is lower than 20%. And also, some of these samples will be sent to the lab for inspection. And the percentage is even lower, which is lower than 5%. However, once there is problem found, when we find that the quality does not meet the regulation, and it would actually be returned and destroyed, and then would also check the importation record.
This is the flow chart of import and export goods customs clearance. Number one is declaration, and then electronic review sheet, which is manually reviewed, and then on-site comprehensive audit, and then tax collection. And then inspection will be implemented. If there are issues with the inspection, there will be follow-up disposal. People also pay attention to under what circumstances the goods will be inspected. In terms of meat product, there is a certain ratio that has to be fulfilled. So it hasn't really reached the maximum level of risk control. So for Canadian businesses, there's a certain proportion that will be inspected. So this will be a random check conducted by GAC. So you don't have to question why some companies are picked and some are not, because this is a proportional sampling test. It's actually trying to control the risk without any human interference. This is very clear. During the inspection, and which is very consistent with the meat products review around the world, because number one, they will check the safety and health requirements of the transportation means and storage place. Most of meat products are transported to China by containers. Number one is to check the sanitation and the health requirements of containers. Number two, we'll check the container number, the sealing number, inner and outer packaging labels, as well as the situation of the goods, whether that is consistent with declaration information and attached documents. So they would have to check the consistency of the information against declaration and attached documents. If it's not consistent, there will be some disposal as well as special treatment process. Number three, for meat products, there might be some wood material packaging If that's the case, we'll also comply with relevant requirements to conduct inspection. Number 4, after the containers are open, the inspectors will inspect inner and outer packaging. Recently, we understand there's a batch of meat products with the inner labels being removed during the process, which did not comply with relevant requirements. And customs officials will also check against the information on the packaging labeling. The labels, identification instructions of the inner and outer package, especially this year, it has to specify the registration number in China on the labels as well as the packaging, and also the sensory traits will be inspected. And also the freshness as well as the central temperature, whether that comply with frozen refrigerated food products. So these are some of the items to be inspected. Under what circumstances and what situations will GAC suspend or prohibit import control measures? Number 1, which is major epidemic situation, system changes. People will pay attention to the BSE situation, and something I will address at the later part of this presentation. And number 2 is pathogen contamination, for example, COVID or some other pathogens. And number 3, unqualified disposal and upgrade. And number 4, illegal activities. And number 5, major safety risks in the production process. In part 3 of my presentation, we'll address an issue of most people's concern, which is the meat products. Number 1, regarding the recent declarations, something has emerged. In the initial stage, when people submitted information to the customs system, the customs code is a little bit different from the international codes because 7 digits at the international level and 10 digits in the China customs. And also for the business registration, we have added 3 more codes to the entire code. So you can actually check against it in the list. So when you register, before you actually fill in the product name, and now it has been changed into the product name as well as the name corresponding to the codes. So for each company, you have to pay attention to the codes. All the relevant product and exported products codes would have to be inputted into the system. Number 2, what are some of the inspection requirements for the meat companies and facilities? Most of the inspection are done by video, and some of the businesses have received video inspection. For each inspection, it's required no less than 2 people, but usually it comprises of 3 people, and sometimes it's even more people joining a team to make the to conduct the inspection. Some of these companies have registered but require information changes. So you can initiate information change application. The materials are quite straightforward. Number 1, comparison table of the changed information in the registration. What are the specific changes? For example, my cold storage was 50 ton, and now it has been enlarged. So now you need to submit the original layout as well as the expanded layout. And the second thing is supporting materials related to the changed information. We'll take the cold storage an example, whether the Canadian authority allows you to make the changes, an official approval or a examination of the enlarged storage. Once it has been assessed, has been approved, then the information can be updated. And number three, something, for example, the relocation of the production facility, it's equivalent to a new factory, then doesn't comply with the requirements of information change. This will have to go through a re-registration process. For example, the change of legal representative, that would also require a new registration. And the packaging, label, and labeling of imported food also have express requirements. For example, it has to have firm, clear, easily identifiable labels and content. As Canada is an English-speaking country, you should have no problem with that. And some of the states and provinces, main language might be French, but you also need to provide Chinese correspondent, for example, the Chinese equivalent in terms of the country of origin, product name, registration name of the manufacturer, specific to state, province, city, production batch number, destination, date of production, shelf life, as well as examination reports and certificate of the export country. What are the standard declaration elements of imported meat products? Number one, which is the codes and the product name, should be consistent with the declaration and consistent with the requirements of the Chinese side. With the imported meat products, which also require pre-approval, number one is entry animal and plant quarantine permit. And the importers will go through this process. And another thing is the automatic import license, which is authorized by the Ministry of Commerce. These are the two elements of the pre-approval process. The next slide is something of importance, which is the renewal of registration.
据我了解啊，我们很多的企业啊，当然不仅仅包括我们加拿大的企业，到明年的6月份，或者是其他的时间。
As far as I know, a lot of companies, not only Canadian companies, up till June of next year, that will be the expiry date of the 5-year limit. Because for GAC, the term is 5 years. So a lot of companies will face the expiry date by June next year. So by then, it has to submit the renewal registration process to GAC. And this has to be submitted 3 and 6 months before the expiration of the registration period. So say if it's valid until the end of December 2022, so the company should make the submission between July 1st and September 30th. Only between this window period can you submit the application to GAC, because only in this period, GAC will open this registration window for the renewal registration. When you renew the registration, what kind of materials do you need to submit? It's straightforward. You need to provide an application and then a compliant declaration. This is a requirement of a normal process. But for those companies who have already received the registration, and in the GAC registration system, the information is not complete. because you haven't completed a relevant complete registration information yet. So these companies are required to provide information as if you are registering for the first time. As I have mentioned in Decree 248, the specific steps are listed in 248, so you need to provide the relevant information. And those companies that do not renew registration accordingly and haven't provided relevant information, the registration renewal will be revoked. And in terms of the inspection evaluation of customs of GAC on the overseas meat production enterprises, which can be done by written inspection, video inspection, and on-site inspection. And because of the travel limit, I think this will be mostly done by written and video inspection. As restrictions are lifted, the GAC officials will be able to conduct on-site inspections to Canada as well as other regions. And for the paper inspection, once you submit the paper materials, that will be approved, and then the video inspection could be done by what we are doing now by Zoom or other devices. And for online inspection, they can have face-to-face communication and then using a mobile camera to inspect the interiors of the production facilities and also to check the on-site parameters and documents. And the on-site inspection will be quite straightforward because a lot of companies have gone through the process.
So also, a lot of people pay attention to the suspension in Decree 249. It also stipulates that if the GAC see that you do not meet the qualification, you will need to rectify. So the qualification will be suspended during that period. So this was in a report, and there was an inspection on an Argentinian company, and whose qualification was suspended because their product did not meet the requirement. A few tips regarding the rectification. So when a registered company does not meet the requirement anymore, and the GAC actually order a rectification and also would raise the issues. So sometimes when we talk to some companies, and we see that some of the companies, they do not have any clue about what needs to be rectified. So you definitely need to communicate clearly with the GAC. And then a written report needs to be submitted, and that needs to be submitted by the local competent authority. And during the rectification period, you may actually exchange maybe emails with the experts, but this is not a formal rectification report. And then GAC would review the rectification report. If it passed, then if it's approved, then they would resume their qualification. And revocation, when there is safety issues, when there are issues regarding inspection, quarantine, and then safety management, and then rectification. If you go through a few rounds of rectification and still not pass, and then your qualification could be revoked, can be canceled. And then false document. If you provide false materials or refusal to cooperate, there have been a few incidents for South Asia and Southeast Asia. They refused to cooperate with the rectification, and they do not answer the calls and emails, and their qualifications can be canceled. And then you cannot sell or transfer or lend your registration number to a different entity. It could also result in the cancellation of the registration. And when your qualification is suspended or when it's canceled, you cannot export to China. And then I would like to talk about the beef from Canada, the beef issues. And so I've actually listed the 3 countries from the Americas: USA, Canada, and Brazil. So USA, Canada, Brazil, we see incidents of BSE report by WOAH. But actually, the cattle and related products under 30-month-old can actually be exported to China, actually similar to Brazil. In Brazil, in 2021, there was this atypical BSE prevalence, and it took about 3 to 4 months, just 3 to 4 months before they got out of it. And they got rid of the ban. So I think you can actually refer to the case in Brazil about how they lifted the ban. And I can actually maybe quickly talk about it. Actually, last year in September, there was a suspected case in Brazil, and I think in Canada is January. This year, we saw cases of BSE. And then Brazil at that time reported the case to China. This is actually a requirement in our bilateral agreement. So the same day, we banned the import of Brazilian beef. But since it's atypical BSE, and it was not a large-scale outbreak. And in September 9th, and in a press conference at the Ministry of Commerce, there was a question regarding this issue, and a response was that Brazil has already complied with the China-Brazil protocol and reported the case, and such exports were temporarily suspended. In the next step, they will maintain a clear communication for to resume the export in the near future. So very importantly, risk assessment and also technical exchanges, communication are very important. In October, mid-October, the foreign ministers of 2 sides met online, and they also talked about this issue, and they hope that they could come to a resolution very quickly. In on November 23rd, GAC actually announced the news that because during the suspension period, all beef products were suspended. And so for those who were given a certification before September 4th, so they could still be exported because the outbreak, the small-scale outbreak, it happened in September. So for those who were produced after that period of time is suspended, but for those who got a certification before September 4th, they are still able to export. So the official communications were very important. So they make sure that these issues were addressed, and also we can also facilitate this kind of communications. And I will next talk about the statistics of unqualified batches of meat exported to China. And since China is the largest importer of meat on a monthly basis, there we would find unqualified batches of products. So on this chart, I could show you the number of batches. And so in October, in total, 234 unqualified batches were identified. And for meat, this is the country of origin. And in Canada, only 2 batches were unqualified. And the largest number come from Russia, 41, and Australia, 53. And the unqualified, the issue that caused the unqualified, and the most serious, most severe cause of that is the cause that the good certificates does not conform. So there's about more than 70 batches of that. And then when the sensory inspection does not meet the requirement, usually from observing or smelling, and then no access to inspection and quarantine. And also, the fourth leading cause is the failure to provide a certification or qualification certification, and then corruption or it contains impurities, and or the label is not qualified, and then where animal diseases, and also North American countries, ractopamine can be detected. So this is for unqualified meat. So we also see there are different types of products that could be unqualified. There's pork, chicken, beef, and mutton. So the largest number falls on beef category. Mutton is the perhaps the smallest among them. So that is all for my presentation for the past 1 hour. And so I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Guan. Before we move on, maybe we can just try to attempt to answer a few questions from our Q&A. So when modification application shows accepted, are they ready to submit application for renewal, or will they have to wait for status approved? Still with us? Okay, well, I guess we'll move on to the next speaker then, and hopefully we can get some of these answers to your questions following the seminar. So now we'd like to welcome Mr. Yang Binbin, Director of the OIG Research Institute, to present information for Canadian aquatic establishments exporting to China.
Hello, good morning, good evening, everybody. 大家好的，谢谢。我还是用中文，麻烦。
Yeah, I think I will present in Chinese, and I will have the interpreters interpret for me.
我是优和集团优领特业研究院的院长杨彬彬。
I'm the director of Optima Integration Group, and I'm very delighted to have this opportunity to give you a presentation. Just now, my colleague, Mr. Feng, gave you an overall introduction of the 2 decrees regarding imported goods, which is 248 and 249. And he also talked about the requirements for registration. And for the next part, I'll give you a presentation on the regulatory interpretation on seafood or aquatic products. So first of all, I would like to talk about the process. The registration process basically is the same, and it requires official recommendation. And so basically, the process is the same with meat products. And I would like to give you a quick overview. I think some of the aquatic products importers just logged online. So the
杨老师你好，您的 PPT 现在没有 share 上去。
sorry, you're not sharing your PPT yet. Sorry, just one second. Yeah, let me share my screen.
Sorry, I forget to share my screen. Sorry for that.对，这个呢就是刚才我讲的啊。首先呢 ，CA 就是主管当局，它呢来
yeah, first of all, the competent
加拿大的这个
authority
它的这个账号，那么
would assign an account number to the enterprise. So with that account, they can fill in the application. So once the these applications is filled out, and they can submit it to CFIA, and then they will review it. If it's then approved by them, they can actually recommend it to GAC, and then GAC would review it, and then if it's okay, they will approve it. So the Canadian enterprise will receive a registration number in China. So that is the process. I like to highlight one thing for the for CFIA.
权利啊，就是因为企业它这些操作啊，这个都得通过
So the CFIA is the competent authority because the application would have to first go through CFIA. So they may seem very powerful because they have the rights of approval, but they also have the responsibility. And in different countries or different regions, for various reasons, some of the CAs, the competent authorities, are very professional. Some are less professional in food safety issues. So for GAC, the information they receive from different countries may vary, so there are different confidence level, and so because that gap in the confidence levels, the approval process, etc., may also vary from country to country.
And some of those CAs are less professional, and then GAC will actually put a question mark behind it and will look into the information in more detail. So these are some of the information that we can pay attention to, as far as I know, because I have in communication with my colleagues in CFIA, we understand CFIA is a very professional CA. So for the businesses, the most important thing is to prepare for the material. Number one is the application form. Mr. Feng just mentioned this part in his presentation, nothing special in it, and think the main requirement is to fill in the information as truthful as possible. Also to make it easily recognizable, understandable to the GAC experts with standard expressions, standard descriptions. One extra question is, if I just apply for renewal, need I prepare all the docs which a new registration requires? And the answer is yes, because for renewed registration, up till now, at the current stage, the first batch of renewed registration would be those businesses registered 5 years ago. So this first batch of registered companies, based on the information 5 years ago, was quite simple, less complete than the current requirement. 5 years ago, they just filled in an application form, but now there are more requirements in the application form. The requirements have been updated, more standardized. GAC requires that by June 30th of 2023, all businesses would be required to supplement those information regardless of the renewed registration. All the aquaculture facilities would supplement information by June 30th, 2023. If you are renewing the registration, then you need to submit this updated information as early as possible, because you have to pay attention to it, because all the information, all the requirements would have to be fulfilled in order to prepare the preparation materials. So for the CAs to conduct inspection, they will review the submitted materials. And after reviewing the materials, they will make the recommendations. How do they make the inspections? What's the procedure for inspection? Number one is to make sure that these businesses comply with Chinese requirements. There are multiple requirements, for example, legal regulation standards, some of those very specific requirements. And GAC has made these requirements integrated in one form. This form has a bundle of requirements. By looking at this graph, you will see very straightforwardly, in terms of all the requirements, the establishment would comply with the requirements in different aspects. For example, sanitation, facilities, hub, systems, and review and examination. There are very specific requirements. And which requirement corresponds to a specific clause and term of the agreement. So if you just go through the list, basically that would be compliant with the Chinese requirements. Then after this review, then the examination report will be submitted, and the authority might recommend more than one establishments and facilities. So you see a list of manufacturers recommended for registration. You see some of the information that would be put in. For example, PP, FV, and TV, and FFV, as well as CS. So these are the production type. The type should be correct and appropriate. And I'm sure people are familiar with the product production types, because these are very similar to that in the EU, which is also universal and as an international standard. I think these kind of categorization 5 years ago, when you submitted information to GAC, 5 years ago, when you submitted to AQSIQ or CNCA, when you submitted information, this category had already been confirmed. And the other thing is HS codes. It's a 10-digit code, as well as a 3-digit CIQ code. And what you see, it might be different from what the Canadian colleagues can check. So you need to check against the information provided by GAC. And the 3-digit CIQ code is also very important. What does it mean? I would like to offer some clarification here. We understand that the HS code might include different kinds of varieties. It's hard to make more specific categories. For example, it's hard to distinguish between wildlife whether is it a wild or farmed salmon. So this is something that's hard to specify in terms of one HS code. So for farmed and wildlife, for GAC, the management might be different. There are different management methodologies regarding these different categories. So GAC is adding an additional code to the 10-digit HS code. So the 3-digit CIQ code is trying to distinguish different varieties.
点呢，就是这个注册产品的时候啊，这个要注明。
So when you are registering a product, you need to specify whether that includes farmed aqua products.
同样的 BMS
This will be something the customs will pay attention to.
关注的，因为这些呢，被认为风险是相对比较高的。
Because some of the shell products are also of a higher risk to the Chinese customs. So this is information that you should submit. So once these materials are prepared, you need to submit a declaration, a statement. It's like a sponsorship. Because it goes through different levels of approval.
那么，企业在提交这个注册、申请注册的过程当中呢
In this process of submitting application materials, there will be multiple interactions with the system. Once I submit information, in what circumstances this information is returned, is revoked, because at different stages, there is a different status. To different status, there is a standard name. So understanding those names corresponding to the status will be very important. As explained by Mr. Feng, I can further clarify regarding the different stages. For example, when you are applying, when you are still inputting information, there is temporarily saved by enterprise and submitted to the competent authority. In terms of the recommendation stage, there is submitted to GAC, recommendation rejected, successfully sent to GAC, etc. And in the system status description, you see there's enter custom database successfully, fail to enter customs database, accepted, rejected, or supplementation required, unapproved, or approved.
另外呢，还有几种状态啊，这个可能在新申请的
And also some other descriptions regarding the status. In the process of new application, you might not be able to see them, but once you submit an application, there's some difficulties. For example, revoked, suspended, or rectification required. I hope this doesn't show up in your application. Part 2 of my presentation. The theme of the webinar today, because according to our colleagues of the embassy, there are many aqua facilities would require renewed registration. To renew registration, we understand that it complies with Decree 248. There is a window period. Before the expiry date of the 5-year limit, the window period is between 3 and 6 months before the expiry date. No earlier or later than that. Because some of the companies might have already missed the window opportunity
加拿大官方的这个沟通好像是有一个比较特殊的一个安排。
I think there's a special arrangement according to the official arrangement, but so there's still a window period for you to renew registration. I hope that you can take the time as soon as possible to complete the renewed registration. And part 3 of the presentation is key questions and challenges. Number 1 is accurate product information, because this is the most important element in the application. The application, the target of the application is essentially the products themselves. So what exactly are the product? We need to have really clear and accurate positioning as well as information. I just mentioned the HS codes, CIQ codes, and the Latin name should also match each other. In the Cipher system, you can look up all the codes and the names, and also you can resort to third-party tools. And also another thing we need to confirm is those products being registered, whether they are on the list, on the whitelist between Canada and China. For example, Atlantic salmon, this is one of the categories listed. If you want to export to China, then you have to check whether in Canada, Atlantic salmon can be exported. If it's okay, then that's fine. If it's not okay, then you have to go back to CFIA for more information. If it's not compliant, then we need to complete the product's application, the main route of this product. After that, each individual company will be able to finish the product registration. Of course, when you're applying for 10 categories, one of them is not approved yet. No problem, because the only one you can submit without the information, and the 9 would be waiting for approval. After you are done with the 9, and then we can focus on the one remaining issue in your application. So on the other hand, we also have collected some of the informations beforehand, some of the questions. One question submitted by a Canadian colleague. Sometimes some enterprises apply for many products, but they need to fill in after being rejected each time. Sometimes they finish the application and the application is being rejected, and then they have to do the process one more time. It's really time consuming. The workload is really huge. Is there any way you can save the information as a template so you don't have to doing the overlapping workload? Well, as far as I know, to ensure the materials are accurate, there's no simple way to do it. I think the only thing you need to pay attention to is the information is required to be accurate to make sure that the material submitted is complete and accurate.
Also, I would like to suggest FCFIA and the embassy can also suggest this to GAC. I think they can continue to improve their process, and at OIG we'll also try to find opportunity to give our suggestion to GAC. And we also have a few tips that we can offer to the enterprises to help them to smooth their registration. We welcome we would like to share those with you too. And then the materials should also be fully prepared. In addition to the documents before, the factory, the workshop, and the cold storage, the layout, these layout sketches, as they should match the actual situation, and they need to be clearly marked, and then also they need to be accurately represented as well. And I don't have the time to get you the material of the plans of the workshop. Actually, when we work with some factories, we actually indicate the flow of workers in the workshop, and then the flow of the raw material in the workshop. So basically, the flow chart of all the products, the raw material finished product. So on those plans, you would actually see the people flow and the good flow, and so that needs to be accurate. And then also the processing technology, the flow chart. For example, some heat processing. You also need to indicate the temperature that also needs to be included in the information. And then HACCP, HACCP, that documents is also very important. And so we require a comprehensive HACCP system, and also they need to have verification. Just some sketch to show you, but it's perhaps not very clear, just a schematic. And then another issue, say there is an update in the registered enterprise address. How can they update that in Cypher? Actually, yeah, some information you can just go ahead and update them on Cypher. But for some information, in addition to updating them on the system, you would also have to apply for changes with GAC. You also need to submit materials. For example, you need to offer a table to show which information needs to be updated and the reason for that. And also you need to have evidence to show that it's actually changed. For example, change of address. And also for certain information, if you change to a new manufacturing location, say if your factory moved, or your legal representative, say your owner is a different person now. CFIA's number, assign a different number to the enterprise. And for these type of information, you actually need to file for a update application. So for this type of situations, you need to reserve enough time to apply for that with GAC. Say if you are moving the factory, or there's a change of the owner, and you need to do that ahead of time so that there could be a seamless transition.
这里还有一个问题哈，就是有的朋友在 Cypher 系统提交了
Another issue is that sometimes an enterprise submit a modification application in Cypher. The set shows that GAC is accepting but has not approved it yet. So it depends on what kind of information you're updating. If it's just general information, then I think eventually you'll get approved. But for more critical information, like what we mentioned in the previous slide, you probably need to, you need to pay attention whether you need to include additional information. You can consult CFIA. So if it's accepting, but it's not approved, so in this case, you cannot submit an extension application because you can only do one thing at a time. However, now, because December 31st is the expiration date, I understand that it's quite urgent now. So if you actually reach out to customer support and still cannot get it resolved, you probably need to talk to CFIA so that they can liaise with GAC to get this issue resolved, or so that your business won't be suspended. And so we talked about some of the things you need to pay attention to during registration. And what do you do after registration? So that you can have a sustainable business. And of course, you need to do your best to avoid unqualified products. Mr. Feng also mentioned that because the GAC is strengthening its amend system, and before there was perhaps not yet a very comprehensive risk assessment mechanism. However, now and also after registration, they have accumulated more information and data on factory inspection and all aspects of food safety. So that's why the registration process takes less time before and also has been streamlined. Because the verification is now put to the later stage. So first of all, you can register. So you try to get as many companies registered as possible. Later, they will do the verification. So first of all, they get, I don't know if it's like that in Canada. And basically in Europe, you don't need to show your tickets when you board the train, but a conductor will come to inspect your tickets. And so it's kind of like that. So first of all, get everybody on board. But of course, you want to make sure that you can qualify for the process. But we try to get everybody, we try to onboard everyone first. So there's some of the potential issues, for example, labeling. And the labeling here are very clear rules. As you can refer to the details listed here for labeling. And besides labeling, you need to make sure that the expiration date or the best before dates, and then the registration number of the manufacturer or the producer, the shelf life, etc. And then these needs to be clearly indicated on the label. And then documents, for example, the health certificate. And then once the goods arrived at the port in China, the customers will first perform a physical inspection to maybe to smell or to just do a visually checkup. So if the product has a bad smell or does not look right, of course, it won't pass the physical inspection, and where they will do a lab test to see whether there is contaminants of, say, for example, heavy metal or additive or drug residues. So these are the items that will be checking in the lab. And we've also been tracking these situations when the imported goods are not qualified. And the chart on the left shows the aquatic products exports to China. And we see that it ranks from Vietnam, Ecuador, Pakistan, Indonesia, Ecuador. So they have the largest number of unqualified goods, and Canada has actually a very small number. And then to the right, these are the different reasons. There could be the labeling, the packaging, or there is insufficient documentation. So these are the reasons. For example, for shrimp, there are many different specifications. For example, the different sizes of the shrimp. So for these different sizes, they are considered different category. So if you got 5 boxes of, for example, if you're importing 400 boxes, but on the certificate, it's indicated 500 boxes, then there is information that does not match the reality. Okay, so that could be the reasons for violation. And then at the bottom, there's a food additives. If there's excessive amount of food additives, that could also happen in the in shrimp products, in fish fillet, and so they might add additives to keep water in the food, in these products, and also coloring. So that could also happen, or animal diseases. That could also be an issue of violation. So usually farmed shrimp, there could be one of the violation for that category of product.
And for those unqualified shipments, for those establishments, and this imports might be suspended. For example, India, Ecuador, and Vietnam, we have more establishments from these 3 countries. In total, approximately 25 establishments were suspended. The suspension I just mentioned is not the most serious punishment. You see that the World Cup is going on. We can give you an example, a metaphor, how a footballer is sent off. Because one offense doesn't make you being sent off. There's a process. You see the several offenses, and then you see the judge might hesitate to give a yellow card, might give a warning, and then several offenses accumulated, and then you get a yellow card, and then 2 yellow cards, you get a red card, and then you're sent off. A more serious offense, for example, we have a footballer kicking someone, kicking another player. Some more severe offenses might be receiving a life ban of competition. So this is a gradual process. So in the Chinese saying that we provide a warning beforehand, But we also want to make sure that the application process for everybody is smooth, is problem-free, but also you need to pay attention to these arrangements in 248 and 249 because all of those circumstances have happened before. So that was the major part of my presentation. Before QA, I would like to share with you latest updates of COVID for cold chain products, because people are paying attention to these issues, are being discussed in the past 2 to 3 years. China's measures regarding imported cold chain products, prevention, as well as COVID test for those products. Along with the situation in China, we see a easing down in the situation in China. Excuse me. So in this regard, we are seeing some restrictions being lifted, more relaxed. For example, the proportion of COVID tests is going down. Not only at the port of entry into China, the circulation within mainland China, there are some changes, and also more changes are coming. For example, the concentrated inspection cabin, because before all the cold chain products have to be concentrated in one cabin with a concentrated decontamination process going on. And some of these areas, some of those areas might have to go through several rounds of disinfection, sterilization before the batches get approved. So this has created a lot of problems, improved and upgraded cost to a lot of facilities and imported goods. This is adding burden to logistics as well as the experience of consumers. And to our relief, I think the policies are being adjusted. But this, and we can expect that these process will be greatly streamlined, and in not so distant future, we can actually see a smoother Chinese market with more streamlined importing process, which will facilitate import from export markets. A good news for all the exporters. So much for my presentation. I'm ready for the Q&A session. Amy, let me see what kind of questions you have and arranged in the Q&A session.
Okay, so I think some of these have been answered, but do you know what is the temperature requirement for frozen food?
Temperature requirement for frozen food, correct?
Yeah.
I think the temperature requirement for frozen food is about minus 18 degrees. So within this temperature, maintaining this temperature will be fine. No other extra requirements.
I was just going to say, for all the questions kind of related to specific cases, please ensure that you've sent all your details to CFIA, and then the request will be routed through the embassy. One here, though, says they've been having problems with Chinese HS codes for aquatic species. Importer in China tells us the HS codes from GAC are wrong. and they're asking which HS codes should they use, the correct code identified by the importer or the incorrect code or the code that comes from GAC.
就是这个是吗？麻烦您看一下。This one?
Is this one?
I can't tell what you're looking at. It's from, it's the third or fourth from the bottom.
我看到了。
Yeah, I can see it.
这应该是水产品吧？水产品。对。OK， 这种情况呢，确实有。
I think this kind of cases still exist, and we have seen this happen before because there's so many varieties and species.
可能
I think in this kind of situation,
可能还得寻求比较专业的帮助，因为这个东西吧
you need to consult with
可能
professional experts for their help. Because in these situations,
可能也忙不过来，可能
embassy might be too busy to give a helping
这个
hand.
要辛苦 CFIA 的这个
Probably you need to consult with CFIA colleagues for specific instructions, or they can integrate the information together if necessary. We can also provide help. After the meeting, you can send us specific information regarding this variety through the embassy. We can look it up together.
Thank you. When you mentioned registration number on the label, do you mean the China registration number or the Canadian establishment number?
标签上的这个呢，它是
The label,
最
the
好的两
number,
个号都有。
I think the best is to provide two numbers together, both the Canadian one and the Chinese
但
one.
是呢，
Better to have two
如果只有
together.
加拿大这个编号，
But if you only have the Canadian number, that's fine too.
Jade, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. 杨老师您好，有好几个问题是涉及
Several
到它这个
questions
状态
related to the
状态
status.
是 accepted 或者是 approval。有很多人问到这
Accepted,
个区别。当然
approval. A
您
lot
在
of people are
刚才的
asking
这
the
个
difference
培训
between
中也讲
accepted
了，
and
那我也
approval.
希望说您能
It
跟大
was
家再讲解
mentioned
一下，
in your
就是
presentation. Could you go
accepted
through
和
it
approval 的区
again?
别，
The
以
difference
及
between
说这个
accepted
比如说
and
这个文件
approval.
accepted 了，然后一直到
For
approval，
example,
它中间
documents
的
being
这个时
accepted
间
all the
大
way
概
to
是会有
approval.
多长，
What's
是由
the
什么样的因素
likely
去决定的？
time frame?
谢
What
谢。
are the factors to determine this time frame?
谢谢。
Thank you very much.
这个问题呢，是这样的，它这个
I
我
think
找一下刚才
this
那个
question, let me go
它的
back
这
to
个
the
accept 呢
slides.
是指的是什么呢？
Accepted refers
是指的是
to
受理啊，指的是受
that
理。
GAC has received the
什
application,
么意
is
思呢？就相
approving
当于
or
我们
reviewing the
去
application.
使馆办签证，
For example,
我
you're
们去任
submitting your
我
visa
他比
application
如说
to
要
the
5个材料，
embassy,
护照啊
and
什么
it's
什么。
required
如果
that
我
you
缺
need
一
to
个，
5
他一眼就看
materials,
出来了，
passport and
他
some
就不
other
会
things.
受理，
If
他就会
one
退给我，
item
我就
is
把这个材料
missing,
补齐
then
了，
this would not be
再过来。
review,
补齐
and
了以
then
后
all
5
the
个了，他一看
materials
啊，
will be
对吧？
returned
好，收
once
下。
I supplement the
收下以后，
leftover
这个就叫
item,
受
and
理。但是
then
呢，受理不等于
it's
approve。
accepted, but
他
accepted
上
doesn't
下
mean
您的
it's
材料以后呢，
approved.
他会仔细地看
Once the
啊。
materials are
如果这里面看出
accepted,
问题，任
they
何
will
材料
go
看出
through the
问题，
materials
他
to
会
see if there are any
跟
issues,
让您去补
problems,
齐、补正、修
and
改
if
等
there
等。
are any
一直
issues,
到最后
they're
没有问题
gonna
了，
ask you to
才
modify and to
就
provide
通
more
过。所以这个
materials
accept 和
all
这
the
个
way
approved 是这
until
么一个区别。
it's approved. So that's the difference between the two.
好的，谢谢杨老师。另
Thank
外，
you
我
very
们还有
much.
一些这个 水产企业可能有一些这种比较
Some
普遍
aqua
性的问题，
facilities have general
他们
questions.
的传
For
动的这
example,
种内标签可能
For
会
example, the
比较难
transmission
去
interior
把它给
labeling.
落实。
It
但
is
是呢，
really
这个是
hard
在
to
相关
get
的
them done.
28、29号令里面是有
But
这
in
个相应的
248
准
and
确的这个规定的。
249,
那
there
么
are
我们也
very
想咨询一
specific
下这样子的
requirements.
这个操作和
So
您
the
的一些建
question
议。谢谢。
is how to operate it and what are some of the
对这个问题
suggestions.
我比较了解啊，原来我也
Thank you
也
for
也
this
接受过这个
question
问题。
because I've heard
确实呢，在船
people
上
relay these
加工的
questions
它
to
面
me
临
because
在工厂加工更多的一些问
processing
题。
on board on the vessel will have more problems than
那么
processing
但
in
是
a
呢，
established
这个
facility.
制度啊是这么规定
So
的。
I
这个呢，可
think
能
it
还
was
没有
requested in the system as well as
没有更好的
requirements,
办法。
but
那么我
however,
只能
they're
说
not
是
really good way to actually
我建议
implement
大家
these
呢应该一
requirements.
步一
So
步来
my
因为至少
suggestion
目前
is
在注
for
册的时候
you
啊
to
还不
proceed
太涉及
step
类
by
标签的
step
事儿。
because
而
up
我
till now the
们
registration
先完
doesn't
成注册
really
完
go
注册之后
heavy
呢，如果
onto
说
the interior
确实
labeling.
在
But once
出口
you
的时
are
候这
done
个
with the
类标签
registration,
遇到很
but
大的
when
问
you
题，
are
我
exporting the
相信
products and
我
if
们
you
的这
have
个
encountered problems with
官
the
方啊，
interior
也会代表
labeling,
大家
I'm
去
sure the
跟
official
Spark 去沟通。
authority
而且我相
will
信，因为
actually
像船
negotiate
舶
with
的这
different
种
parties on
产品
behalf
啊
of
不只
GAC
是加拿大有，
because
很
these
多国家都有。
products
那这个
on
问题
vessels
如果是
not
一个普遍
only
性的问题的话，
being
那可以 Spark
exported
去
from
面对
Canada, but also from other
考虑。
countries. It's a very universal issue. So GAC would take into consideration from different factors.
Okay. We just have a few more minutes, I guess. For all the questions that we didn't have answered from the Q&A, we will do our best to address them. Again, just a reminder, if you have specific questions about your renewal process or your company, please send the details to CFIA and it will be bridged through the embassy. And just to reiterate that these issues with the CIPHER renewals and the CIPHER profiles are top of mind for us at the embassy and for CFIA. We're continuing to work on them as best we can. With that, I want to thank our two guests today from OIG for preparing this information for us. Thank you all for attending. And again, for any market development related inquiries, please reach out to myself or my colleague Yu Zhang. And for anything related to market access, please reach out to the Market Access Secretariat or Trevor Yu here at the embassy. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you have a good evening or a good rest of your day.
谢谢大家，谢谢翻译。Thank you, Amy. Thank you.